Welcome back to the 411 on Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, Blake Lovell, back here with thoughts on WWE Crown Jewel ahead of the show, which will take place on Thursday in Saudi Arabia. The unique day show, which we get each year when WWE goes to Saudi Arabia, will take place during the day, so there will be lots of reaction afterward, I'm sure, based on what is a pretty stacked card when you look at how WWE has built this one up. We've kind of grown accustomed to that at this point. When you just look at how they treat this event each year, it is. They've said it before, but it's basically a WrestleMania level type card that they try to build up for this show. And I think they've done a pretty good job of giving you some must see matches, several at least, others to be determined. But there are, on paper, some very good matches on this card, even if there has been frustration with WWE, which we all know that. But when it comes to the actual events and pay-per-views and such, a lot of them, more often than not, seem to deliver for the most part, not everything. But I think that's kind of what we'll see here, as it is going to be a different sort of approach to the booking, but we'll see kind of how things unfold here. Let's jump into the card, and we'll start with the Mansoor Mustafa Ali match. I think that's probably, one of the more easier matches to predict on this card. And I think that's okay, because we always talk about this. It's like, when WWE has, people that are clearly over, whether that's in their hometown, somewhere else, and some of these other spots, they always sometimes go with the swerve. They don't want to let anyone be happy about anything. But I think, as we've seen, with Mansoor, kind of the journey for him in WWE and kind of where it started, I mean, they built this up to certainly be in a situation where he's going to win this match. I think this is easily the most predictable match on the card. And again, there are going to be several others that are very easy to predict too, I think. But this is your lock. Like, this is the one that Mansoor is going to win this match. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't. And the beauty of the internet is that we will have this audio recording to play back on the next episode if he does not win. But I do think this is a pretty easy choice here with Mansoor to win. I don't know what this means, for either of these two moving forward. Keeping up with everything, and they're going to head to SmackDown, and does it mean anything for them in the future? Do they wind up teaming again? It's very hard to predict, but they clearly built this up for this spot right here, and we'll see how it goes with them and kind of where things go from here. But this seems like one where you'll get a good crowd reaction. People will be behind Mansoor, and give him the win. And at this point, what does it hurt Ali? Because I think that his booking has been so up and down over the years that there's only so much more you can say about what they're doing with him, and the expectations are not very high, perhaps moving forward, for what they're going to do on that. King of the Ring, tournament finals, Finn Balor and Xavier Woods. I think this is going to be a good match, and I think it's fun to finally see Xavier Woods, get this sort of spotlight as a singles competitor and show that, he is pretty good in the ring. Like, I think that's something that when you have someone that's in a tag team, I don't want to say it's easy to forget, but there are different elements to tag team wrestling and singles wrestling. And I think when you see what Woods can do in sort of these, singles type spots, I think it's kind of fun to think about, the possibility of what they're going to do. Do I think he's going to be, in that Kofi Big E scenario where he's going to be the WWE champion? As of right now, I don't think that's, going to be something that you're going to see him in that spot booked by WWE to get there. But they've at least taken, some stock on him and pretty confident in putting him in, this tournament finals here. And Finn Balor on the other side, I think, is one where, coming out of the mysterious rope break at Extreme Rules, which I still don't know that we have any sort of, insight or great development on that, which that was something where I was probably someone that said, hey, let's see what's next. Let's see how it plays out. Well, clearly not a whole lot to do with that, with whatever happened with him. But I think this is, it's going to be tough to predict this one, because you do have the scenario which we don't always get this in WWE. You do have, babyface versus babyface, and you've got, two people that are cheered quite often, and people can get behind either one of them. But I just feel like it's it's maybe one of those situations where it's like putting Woods in the finals. You could see this from WWE where it's like, all right, we've heard him talk about this and all this before. We're not going to put him to win it, but we're going to put him in the finals. Maybe that will make people happy if we just put him in the finals and then Balor ultimately wins. But I don't really think Balor needs it. Like, he doesn't need the King of the Ring win. Like, I mean, you've got the Demon, you've got all this other, I mean, do we need King Balor? Like, I think a King Woods and, King Xavier, whatever they decide to do with this, I think it can be a lot more entertaining in terms of what the possibilities are there, because again, Finn Balor's already the Demon. What does it matter if he's the King, right? Like, I don't know that there's a lot that you can necessarily push forward with this, but I think with Woods, there's a lot more entertaining possibilities, and I'm sure they'll lean into that, whether consistently or not. I just think there can be some entertaining things they could do if it is Woods. I'll pick Woods here. I don't know if it's going to happen. Unfortunately, I think people have sort of been, over the years, we've kind of gotten to the point where it's like when you expect or you kind of wish for one thing, you always think that it's going to be the other in terms of how it turns out. But I think Woods is the right call here, and I could be wrong on that, but I don't know that I necessarily also see them, have him beating Finn Balor, who just challenged for the Universal Championship. So this is going to be a good match. I will say that. I think it's going to be a good match, but I think this is a tougher one to call here in terms of who could win this one coming out of it between Balor and Woods for the King of the Ring crown. And then there's the Queen's Crown tournament, which has left a lot to be desired in terms of match time. Not a lot to it. I want to say it's been, 14, 15 minutes total for all the matches in this tournament. It's been a disappointment. And there were people, I wrote a column on 4-1 Mania not long ago, right after, I guess it was after the first round, and talked about how it was sort of a bigger picture of the women's division as a whole, outside of your top 4 or 5 stars. The booking of everyone else has just been a complete mess, and the stats are there to prove it. That's not an opinion. That's just facts. Like, the facts are that a lot of these women, like a Zelina Vega, like Liv Morgan, Carmella, you go down the line, other people who've been in this tournament, I think now you can add Shayna Baszler to the mix, because all this big push that Shayna Baszler is getting, she loses a match in a couple minutes to Doudrop, which I have no problem with Doudrop being in the finals of this tournament, because at least perhaps you've got to assume here, and she's going to be my pick. I think she's going to win this thing. But at least they're trying to do something with her. But this is where the problem is. You have a Shayna Baszler who you've kind of just restarted, and she's just destroying everyone, literally injuring people. You're presenting her as this big, undefeatable, monster, and she loses in 2 minutes, even though it was, based off sort of your kind of flash pinfall scenario. But I think it's just a bigger problem with the overall booking of everyone, not named Becky, Charlotte, Bianca, Sasha, and so forth. I think that's the bigger issue here. And I think that is something that WWE is really going to have to look at moving forward. And maybe this is an opportunity. Let's say Doudrop wins this thing. Maybe they decide to start to find ways to put her in that upper echelon. But can they do it consistently? And that's where, when you have this tournament final, the booking of this tournament has not been consistent whatsoever, when you consider that Zelina was just basically fed to everyone in a couple minutes. Like, she has not won hardly any matches since her return. She's not won much at all outside of this tournament. And so I think it just makes it much harder to get invested in that. And that's one of the issues I think WWE has to address at some point moving forward. Maybe this is a possibility to start doing that, like we said, with a Doudrop and such. But I don't have a lot of optimism on that, because it's proven that over the past year or so, especially, you just have not had, outside of those top women stars that we mentioned, there's just not been a lot that you've been able to really sort of sink your teeth into when it comes to some of these, whether you call it mid-card, whatever you want to call it. The consistency has not been there. And so it's hard to always get invested, because you always feel like you're going to be left in a spot where it's like, well, why should I invest in this, knowing that she's probably going to win this week, but you know what, she'll probably turn around and lose next week, and then that cycle will continue for 2 or 3 weeks and a month and 2 months, and before you know it, 6 months and a year's gone past, and you're in that same spot. So I will give them, the benefit of the doubt here. I assume Doudrop wins this. That's my pick. But, if Zelina wins it, okay. Like, what do you do after that? But I think there is a bigger problem with the women's division overall right now. Again, outside of the top tier, the ones that are being focused on in actual stories and such, there's bigger issues, and we'll see what happens with that. I mean, like the Naomi Sonya stuff has been good, like we said, what you're getting with the top stars, but this is where they have to, I think, do a much better job of building other people up to be those top stars, and maybe this is an opportunity to do that with Doudrop, and perhaps this match will get more than 3 minutes. I hope so, but we'll see if that actually happens. Let's talk about Goldberg, Bobby Lashley, no holds barred match. We know the build to this one. Everything to do with Goldberg's son, and Goldberg essentially out for blood here with Bobby Lashley. And this is where, on the surface, to me, Bobby Lashley should win this match. But then, I think when you factor in the entire build to this, the fact that the show is happening in Saudi Arabia, I think there is a very possible chance that Goldberg is going to win this match, because it is something where it's like, all right, you've set up this storyline where it is man somehow going after another man's son, which I don't think has been, one of those things that played. I thought the way they played it up at SummerSlam, having Gage run in and Lashley didn't know who it was. I thought it was it was an interesting decision, I think, to go that route. But I mean, you've had Goldberg basically, again, hyping this up as a life or death type thing here, where it's like he has to win this match. He's going to get his revenge. Gage is going to be there. I almost think it's like, well, how does Goldberg not win this match? I don't know that he should, but I keep thinking, I'm like, this is WWE Saudi Arabia show. Like even if you look at like the betting odds, like Lashley's the favorite here, but I keep thinking in the back of my head, the way they built this up, I find it hard to believe that Goldberg's not going to win this thing. And again, maybe I'm wrong on this, but that's why we do predictions. Like it's impossible, I think, to make these kind of predictions for a lot of wrestling companies, but I think it is more so difficult with WWE at times because you just never know what the plan's going to be on some of this and how many times that plan could change. I will actually pick Goldberg here. I think with how they played this up, the story that they put in place, I just cannot see them having Goldberg lose this match, talking about all this stuff about avenging his son and all of this. If you have Goldberg lose that match, well, then, I think it's, you take him down a notch here. And again, what does that hurt at this point in his career? Not much, because they're going to keep doing, I think, this cycle of what they've done with Goldberg. It's not like he's going to be on TV every single week. He'll come back for a couple matches, and that'll be that. But I think Goldberg wins, and we'll see what the scenario is there, unless they do the swerve where Gage turns on Goldberg, and all of a sudden we've got Gage Goldberg, the new heel rock star phenomenon here in WWE. I don't want to give any ideas, but I suppose that's always a possibility. But no, in all seriousness, I'm picking Goldberg here. I think this is the route they're going to go, but could be wrong. We'll see on that. All right, RK Bro versus AJ Styles and Omos for the tag team championships, Raw. That is, I will say this. I think that this is one where I am getting to the point, and it has nothing to do with Omos, but I think I have kind of gotten to the point, and also WWE has used him in this scenario. Like, they've used him in singles matches, but I kind of want to get back to seeing the AJ Styles, top star singles wrestler who can be in some of these top matches. And I think we're probably going to get there sooner rather than later. At least that's my hope, because I just kind of miss that aspect, I think, with Styles. Like, he's been in this team for a while now. And I think at first, some of us thought maybe it's going to be more of a short-term thing. Like, this has been going on for a long time. And I'm not saying that this is, a product of anything to do with Omos, but I just want to see Styles in more singles matches. I want to see him more invested in singles feuds, which, again, has sort of happened in a sense with Orton and Riddle. He's been able to have matches with both of those two, but I do like the idea of eventually, sooner rather than later, getting Styles back to sort of, because he's still really over. I mean, he's still someone that is really, really good at what he does, and I think there's a path to get there very soon. I just don't know exactly what that path looks like. Meanwhile, I suppose some people may say the exact same thing for Riddle and Orton, where you get to perhaps putting those two back in singles, action at some point. But there has been a good balance with this. I don't know that this feud has been for everyone, but I think they've done a good balance of not just having tag team match after tag team match after tag team match, they have had some of these singles, pairings and such, and it's given you good matches. So maybe that's kind of what they're going to continue to play into. But I'm not against, eventually somehow if we can get this tag team division built up a little bit more, which has been, again, a very hard thing to do because everyone is trying to coexist these days in WWE. Whether it's Orton, Riddle, Big E, McIntyre, Ciampa, Breaker, like go down the line, like Rhea, Nikki, like there's just every tag team it seems like is can we coexist? I think eventually we're going to see the split somewhere along the line with one or both of these teams. I don't know when it's going to happen. Maybe we get some seeds planted sooner rather than later, but I will pick Orton and Riddle here because again, maybe that's sort of the setup for Styles to eventually get in that spot. But I think Orton and Riddle probably the better pick here in this one, so I'm going to go with them to retain the championships. And let's go to the Hell in a Cell match, Edge and Seth Rollins. This should be a really good match. This is another one, like we say, on paper. I mean, you're not going to have you're going to have a hard time finding a bad match out of these two, period. But I think, the Hell in a Cell adds another aspect to it. They built this up, as sort of your very intense feud between these two. They've cut promos back and forth. There's obvious hatred there, and we talk about, the whole thing with Rollins invading Edge's home and all this stuff, which, is something, but it's a good match. Like this could very well be the best match on the card when all is said and done. I think Edge wins, sort of kind of like we talked about with the Goldberg Lashley thing, where it's like, Rollins invaded this man's home, and it's something where, hey, basic good versus bad one-on-one. The good should be able to eventually, get the win over the bad here, and so I'm gonna pick Edge to win this match. I think Edge is probably the choice here. Whether again, you agree with it or not in terms of where things are at, but I think they built it up really well, and I just think that Edge gets the win, and for Edge, he's gonna have to. Well, both these guys are headed to Raw. So, there's possibility for them to continue this again at some point in the future, but it's a Hell in a Cell match. Should be a blow-off. Not always the case with the WWE, but I think this is kind of your blow-off to the feud here, and I think Edge wins. So I'll pick Edge in the Hell in a Cell match, and then I think it'll really be interesting to see where these two go from here. Now that they are moving to Raw, there are some, new possibilities they can work with. I wouldn't mind seeing the Edge AJ Styles thing that we talked about a minute ago with Styles. So it'll be interesting to see the direction I think that both of these go in after this match, and maybe what kind of tweaks there are perhaps to their characters. We'll see on that. All right, let's get into the SmackDown Women's Championship match, the triple threat. Becky Lynch, Bianca Belair, Sasha Banks for that SmackDown Women's Championship. Clearly, the setup here is interesting because if Becky wins, Charlotte's still the Raw Women's Champion. You're going to have to do a swap like you did with the Street Profits and New Day. That did not go over well with people. Could they really do it again? They certainly could. They certainly could do just a swap again, where you have these two switch championships, since one, is going to Raw, one's going to SmackDown. Maybe Becky becomes the Raw Women's Championship that she never lost. Charlotte instantly becomes the SmackDown Women's Champion. I really hope they don't go this route, but the thing is set up to where the only way out of it is to have Sasha Banks win this match, which I am not against. I think that is clearly from something that would make sense the most is to have Sasha win this, because in that scenario, I don't know that it's going to help anyone in terms of Becky or Bianca, because I think the problem you have in the Sasha scenario is that in all likelihood, if Sasha wins this match, she's going to pin Bianca. And I think, going back to SummerSlam, I was of the opinion too, and I will willing to admit that I'm wrong here if this is how it plays out. It was wait and see. Let's see if this Becky-Bianca thing, this basically squash you had there, does it make Bianca a bigger star moving forward? Based on what has happened thus far, I think the answer is no. And based on, let's say Sasha were to win this match, she's probably going to pin Bianca. I don't think she's pinning Becky. So that, I think, would be another sort of strike towards play out of that scenario that happened at SummerSlam. But again, I think that Becky probably wins here. It's hard to call. And that maybe is the problem, is I think Bianca's third on this list for me. is I think it's probably Becky first, Sasha, and then Bianca. And I don't know if that's a good thing to kind of be thinking about it in that regard now for Bianca based on where she was heading into SummerSlam and where she is now. But I could see them doing the swap again. I would absolutely hate to see it, but I could see them swapping these titles. So I'm going to pick Becky here. I think Sasha's the right move because that takes away some of the issues here in terms of, then what do you do in terms of having Charlotte, who's the Raw Women's Champion, go over to SmackDown? Then I think you have a dynamic where it's like, all right, at least you have your SmackDown Women's Champion on SmackDown, which is Sasha. Then I think you get to figure out, okay, well, what the heck do we do with Charlotte? And that's where I think, Charlotte as a heel could play into that and be like, well, hold on a second. I shouldn't be losing my title. Then maybe you kind of have that switch where Charlotte goes after Sasha. Then, the Raw Women's Championship, Becky has claim to it that she didn't lose it. There's a lot of sort of scenarios I think you could play out there, but I am probably most intrigued by this, outside of the main event. This is the second one I'm most intrigued by because I'm curious to see what they do here. Should be a good match. I think it'll be a really good, performance from all three women. But the decision they decide to make here is certainly going to set the course for what's to come on both brands in terms of the championships on that. So very curious to see how that plays out there. All right, let's talk about the Big E Drew McIntyre for the WWE Championship. I think this is pretty straightforward. I think it's going to be Big E winning this match. This is all about Drew McIntyre. I think sort of giving that, one more kind of push for Big E as the champion. And we know McIntyre is heading to SmackDown. Big E is your WWE champion. That's not going to change. Again, I think this is all about giving Big E another big win, which I think they've done a really good job with Big E thus far. I know, some people are wildly talking about Raw ratings and being a product of Big E and all this. That's just pure nonsense because Big E I think they booked him pretty well as champion. They've done a good job. I think putting everything, kind of where it needs to be with him to really build him up as this, big time, big field champion. And I think this is another opportunity here where if he beats McIntyre clean, straight up, that gives Big E another push in the right direction. I think this should be a really good match between these two, very hard hitting. But I think McIntyre, has the SmackDown here and, perhaps starts chasing after Reigns. Big E stays the WWE champion. And speaking of Reigns, it will be Roman Reigns going one-on-one with Brock Lesnar for the Universal Championship. Of course, the whole dynamic here has been played up about what is Paul Heyman going to do. And I've actually enjoyed, a lot, really, the build to this. And even though I find it very hard to believe Brock Lesnar is going to beat Roman Reigns in this match, I'm more curious to see how they do this. And I think that's a good thing. Like, you want to have that intrigue heading into a match that's this big, of this caliber, having a match that eventually we knew they were going to work to at some point in time. When you added in Heyman managing Reigns, when the whole dynamic changed when Reigns came back last year, you knew this was a match that was going to be in the works at some point. And now that you're getting it, how do you do it? And I really, really hope that there are no sort of non-finishes here, which I think would just be a bad idea, given just, the goodwill and everything you want to try to build up moving forward, heading into, this whole revamp and everything that you're trying to do on both brands after you've had the draft and all this. I just would like to think there's going to be a finish here, but I also know that you're talking about two of the most protected guys that WWE has had in a long time in terms of pushing them as the guy. Reigns has been pushed as the guy. Lesnar has been pushed as the guy. And when you have those setups, you often wonder, how is WWE going to get out of this scenario? And are they going to give you the non-finish like we've seen before, in certain scenarios? We've seen those recently. We've seen those in the past. I think that is, to me, the most interesting aspect of this is, are they actually going to have Reigns pin Lesnar? And if they do, you would assume there's probably going to be some sort of shenanigans involved with Heyman there, who has pretty much declared that he is going to be walking out of Crown Jewel with the Universal Champion. So keeping it a little vague, but I don't see a scenario here where you're having Heyman turn on Lesnar, or Heyman turn on Reigns or anything to rejoin Lesnar. I just don't see that playing out. I think that would be sort of a short-sighted move if for some odd reason they decided to do that. But I am looking forward to this one. I will say that, and it's such a different thing than we're used to seeing when it comes to Reigns versus Lesnar. We've always known in the past it's been pushing Brock as this big heel champion versus Reigns, who was kind of the guy put in that chosen one babyface scenario at the top of WWE. That was always one of those things that worked at times but didn't work at other times. Now it's such a different feel having these two swap places basically. But both feel pretty fresh in terms of where they're at in their character at this point in their career. Again, because Brock has sort of flipped now into being someone that people want to root for against Reigns, and others will not. Others will still be behind Reigns, just based on what he's done over the past year or so. But I can't pick Lesnar here. I mean, I think you have to pick Reigns because I think this. We've talked about it before. Who eventually dethrones Roman Reigns, which I'm actually putting together a column that'll go up on 411, assuming that Reigns wins this match. I'm going to wait to make sure because otherwise it will be, not really worth the time to revisit that argument that we talked about probably 6 months or so now ago and looking at, who are the best options. Well, if Reigns beats Lesnar, even if they have another match, I just don't know that Lesnar's going to ultimately be the one that's chosen to beat Reigns. Maybe they do it. Maybe for them, the story works because of the Heyman aspect, and maybe that is sort of your ultimate blow-off, is to have Lesnar beat Reigns. But, in my opinion, we know that The Rock is still out there. There's been rumors of him coming back in Survivor Series. If you're going to do that, how they have to build to that match with Reigns versus Rock, assuming that that's what they're going to do. And if you do that, you want to still have Reigns on this, unbeatable streak that he's been on. And so in that scenario, you're going to have Reigns win this match against Lesnar. It's just, how does he do it? How does Paul Heyman factor into it? So there is a lot of fascinating possibilities with that. And, again, even if there are some things on the card, I think WWE necessarily hasn't done a great job building up. Others have been okay, but I think this one is easily, certainly, at the very top in terms of what you're probably most looking forward to see how they go about this. And we'll see kind of what comes of it and maybe what the direction is moving forward for both based on what happens in this match. So there are some thoughts on WWE Crown Jewel. Again, on paper, good looking card. And we'll see how things deliver on that front once it's actually in the ring. And, of course, we'll have all the coverage you need of that over at 41mania.com. We'll have live coverage during the event on Thursday, so be sure to check that out. All our news, columns, reviews, everything will be up over there. So check everything out on the site, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. Any podcast app you use, search for 411 on Wrestling. And as always, we'll have the link to the GoFundMe for Larry Zonka's family in the show notes, so be sure to continue to share and contribute to that if you can, and everything else, 411mania.com. But thanks as always for listening to the podcast, and we'll talk to you next time here on the 411 on Wrestling podcast.